Good morning, everybody. Chris Morris, head of the NGO and Civil Society Center at Asian Development Bank. I welcome everyone to the Strengthening Civil Society Engagement in ADB Operations for our CSO Anchors. Welcome all participants, those who are colleagues from NGOC and also colleagues from ADB this morning. I'm signing in from the UK, from wherever you are. A warm welcome to this event. Can I just have a quick sound check? Am I coming across loud and clear? So we'll start.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So we're very excited, particularly about the event this year, our 2021 CSO Anchors Training, because it was exactly 20 years ago, back in 2001, that the NGO Cooperation Network, which we now refer to as the CSO Cooperation Network, was established. So a special warm welcome to all our CSO anchors and their NGOC colleagues for the 3 days of 2021 training. So it was, as I say, the video that you saw on the introduction, a lot of reference to Strategy 2020, of course, with Strategy 2030 coming into effect in 2018. The NGO and Civil Society Center has been working hard on updating a series of documents on that to strengthen what we call meaningful civil society engagement. And the training is going to focus principally on those updates and the progress that we've made over the years. So let me share a few highlights of 2021, the exciting year that has taken place so far. So the year started with the approval of the new the new corporate CSO engagement indicator, which is linked to the SPRSS and the PCR on projects, moving from planned civil society engagement to a measurement of actual meaningful civil society engagement as reported on a project in the PCR. Following that, in May, there was approval of the OME4 on the promotion of engagement with civil society organizations. This is an important document, and it importantly defines civil society organizations, replacing the term officially, the term of NGO with CSO throughout the document. It categorizes the 4 main approaches to CSO participation, which you're all familiar with: information gathering and sharing, consultations, collaborations, and partnerships. And working with government, it outlines ADB's pursuit of an expanded program of engagement with civil society organizations, specifically to tap, recognizing their unique strengths, such as their local presence and specialized knowledge, in order to explore opportunities for increasing their involvement in ADB operations and to seek their inputs and advice on major policies. Important year this year for policies, with the SPS and also the energy policy, which actually goes to the board today. The OM states specifically that ADB seeks proactive, meaningful, and productive engagement with CSOs to explore opportunities for increasing their involvement in the design and implementation of ADB operations. And relevant to the CSO Cooperation Network, it also acknowledges the important role of CSO anchors in promoting meaningful civil society engagement. Concurrently approved in May was the new SI, staff instruction on promotion of civil society engagement with CSOs. And the SI describes the engagement at a policy level, country partnerships, and of course throughout the project cycle at a project level in ADB. And the CSO Cooperation Network in the staff instruction is defined together with their important role in civil society engagements in resident mission. The modality of CSO engagement is also described in the SI, in the procurement, partnerships, and in other potential ways to engage with CSOs. For example, with how to engage with advocacy NGOs, and importantly, covered by the SI is engaging with civil society organizations in resident missions and representatives offices, and the role of the CSO cooperation network, or CSO anchors as we refer to. So if you are one of our anchors, welcome. And if you don't know what paragraph 40 of the SI says, make sure you do now before joining tomorrow's session, where there'll be an elaboration of that and further discussions. So these new documents are all in line with the promotion of meaningful civil society engagement by our new strategy 2030. And there is one final document which has not been released yet, that you will be covering in the 3 days of training. Again, this will be introduced to tomorrow, and you'll get access to this during the training to help more with toolkits and the how to engage with civil society. That's an update of the 2009 CSO sourcebook from the NGO Civil Society Centre, the sourcebook on promotion of engagement with CSOs in ADB operations. So an exciting suite of documents in our 20-year celebratory year. So starting with today, and it is appropriate to actually start with CSOs themselves. So day one of the training, we do have in session one a series of civil society stories, and I'm very pleased that Jelson, Hong, and Julia are joining to give examples of ADB and engagement with CSOs. Tomorrow I mentioned the CSO sourcebook. Also, there's some reflections on meaningful civil society in South Asia. And then we're moving on to day 3 on Friday, where there'll be a peer learning exchange of good practices on CSO engagement, and importantly, action planning with the CSO anchors in civil society engagement, and that will be done in on a regional department basis within the framework of these new documents and enhancing civil society engagement and the role that you have in that as anchors. So from me, I think that's sufficient to set the scene for this training. Thank you for joining and for all the hard work that has been put together by NGOC colleagues, and the regional anchors. Roselle Rosé, a shout out to her, who's been leading the training preparation this year. Day one, let's start moving. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a new member to the NGO and civil society team, Marina Best, who joined us on the 11th of October, so very, very fresh. She's our new senior social development specialist in NGOC. So Marina, over to you to kick off day one. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. And hi, everybody. A big and warm welcome to you all, to both our audience and panelists. It's really great that you were able to join today. And I think we have a great set of panelists, and this is going to be a really nice way to kick off our training. Okay, so I see we've got the slides up. Okay, so now before we start, just a really quick administrative matter. So I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the chat box function within Zoom. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but you can find it at the bottom of your screen. We are encouraging questions and participation through the chat function. And time allowing, we'll try to address any questions that kind of come up during the conversation towards the end of things. Okay, great. So now on to the good things. As I'm sure you all know, as an institution, Adb interfaces with civil society from numerous perspectives. We rely upon their knowledge and expertise, from inputs into the policy development process to tapping into their specialized on-the-ground knowledge to improve our operations, and to relying upon them as another set of eyes and ears on the ground to make sure our projects are implemented well. So in all, they're a critical part in ensuring that we do development well. Now, given the myriad roles that civil society plays, we are delighted today to have here our panelists who really represent the best of civil society's engagement with Adb, and to hear from them their perspectives on working with our institution and how to strengthen Adb and civil society engagement. So our panelists, I don't know if I can't see all of the videos, but if you want to go ahead and turn your video on, that would be great. So first up, I would like to welcome Jelson Garcia, who I believe many of you know. Jelson is an expert in safeguards and governance, and currently serves as the Senior Stakeholder Engagement Specialist for the ongoing Safeguards Policy Review and Update here at Adb. Prior to Adb, Jelson was the Asia Program Director of the Bank Information Center, which is an independent nonprofit that advocates for the protection of rights, participation, transparency, and public accountability among the international financial institutions. So the Bank Information Center has been instrumental in many of Adb's key policy reviews, including the ongoing Safeguards Policy Review. And I will note that ahead of this conversation, Jelson did give me permission to say that due to his prior roles, he actually is the troublemaker of this group. So next up, we have Reaksmay, who is the country director for Action Aid in Cambodia. Action Aid Cambodia is a global movement of people working together to achieve greater human rights for all and defeat poverty. Action Aid is an active member of the CSO committee that was formed under the Adb-supported COVID-19 CARES program in Cambodia, and is regularly consulted by the government of Cambodia on the implementation of the CARES program. So last and certainly not least, Julia Marango is the Resilience Project Manager for CARE Vanuatu and a highly experienced humanitarian with expertise in implementing resilience programs, humanitarian responses, and gender programs. So CARE is an international humanitarian organization with a special focus on working with women and girls to bring lasting changes to their communities. And CARE Vanuatu is currently implementing Adb's Cyclone PAM school reconstruction project. So with that introduction, I'd like to start by giving our panelists the opportunity to speak a bit more in depth about their organization's work and how they've interfaced with Adb in the past. So given the importance of the ongoing policy reviews, Chris did note that the energy policy review is being considered by the board today. I thought it might be nice to, Jelson, start with you. So can you perhaps give us some insights into the Bank Information Center, some of the things that you care about, and its engagement in Adb's various policy reviews?
Sure. Thank you, Marina. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, everyone, wherever part of the world you are in. So I was asked to speak to you today wearing my former civil society hat. So I'm speaking with you now, not as a consultant of the Adb, but I think what I'm going to speak at this point will have direct implication to my current role, which I will be discussing a little later on question number 2. So my engagement with the Asian Development Bank was largely around the application of safeguards, transparency, policy, and accountability mechanisms for both sovereign and non-sovereign projects, which were financed by the Adb or even co-financed by peer MFIs. And of course, supporting communities or project-affected people that use these policies. That engagement started in 2005 when I joined the Bank Information Center. It is not a service delivery organization. We're not a consultant. It's really known for its watchdog role, including project monitoring and policy advocacy. And it actually officially started in 2005 when I did a scoping of civil society engagement with the MDBs in Mekong in Southeast Asia. So I spent over 6 months there talking to various civil society groups in Cambodia, all the way to Yunnan in Beijing in China, to as far as West Java in Indonesia. And which then led Bank Information Center, which at the time was beginning to decentralize its operation because most of the advocacy of the banks are done in Washington, D.C. So we decided to decentralize to make sure that our program services are closer to the communities and civil societies that need them. Because at the time, so I set up our office in Bangkok. I hired staff from Indonesia, Myanmar, and also some regional staff to help me deliver our program services that included information sharing, providing bespoke training for communities that have particular concerns about project in Vietnam or the Highway 1, for example, in Cambodia. And in addition to that, we also found ourselves to be facilitating a lot of dialogue with bank staff, operation staff, including those at the resident mission, the management, and if things are really important, we can even bring this to the attention of the executive directors. So I've done all those, and we were also good at publishing evidence-based advocacy papers. That role actually expanded when I went to Washington, D.C. to head the Asia program, and my geographic scope expanded to cover South Asia and then Mongolia. And then my remit also expanded to include doing advisory role for our international policy advocacy, including the revision of the ADB safeguards policy, which is currently being reviewed. Also, the revision of the IFC performance standards in 2012. And before I left BIC in 2015, I was deeply engaged in the revision of the World Bank safeguards, which led to the adoption of the environmental and social framework in 2018. I think what is key to all this kinds of policy engagement is that most of our policy submissions, where we put some policy language and substantive, policy recommendations, are based largely around our experience with the communities that have experience with implementation challenges of safeguards. So, for example, when we did the safeguards engagement at the ADB and in the World Bank, we were banking, at least in Asia region, our experience with 22 projects, and it's 16 of these projects, whether it's financed through, financial intermediary lending or multi-trans facility, in the traditional, lending using ADF or OCR, basically required us to have capitalize or draw lessons from those experiences, so that makes us even more grounded. So when we intervene in the involuntary resettlement policy of the World Bank, we capitalize on our expertise in Cambodia. And when we also did our engagement with the ADB safeguards policy from 2006 to 2008 until its adoption in 2009, we draw lessons from our experience with, say, the Samut Prakarn wastewater management project in Thailand. So those kinds of things. So basically, I was literally involved in 16 of these eligible cases. And I played multifaceted support in these cases, and mostly behind the scene. Now, maybe let me give you concrete examples of what it means to do an engagement with the ADB around project safeguards application. It's very quickly. If we could have the first slide, please. All right. So the first slide that you see is an interview with Al Jazeera, by Al Jazeera, with the Bapenas minister, the national planning minister in Indonesia. And on the right, you will see an ADB staff. The lady in the middle is a former commissioner on National Human Rights, Women's Rights Commission in Indonesia, and also part of the civil society. They were discussing about the ADB funding of the integrated Chitarum River watershed management. I'm not going to put it on the spot, but at the time, our dear friend Chris was the task team leader at that time. And basically, before they get into elevated this concerns on Chitarum with Al Jazeera, I have played a role there already in providing technical training for communities. We visited one of the project sites in Bikasi. We interviewed women, and then we also did some kind of a review of the implementation of the resettlement plan of that project. To cut the story short, this project was then brought to the OSBF, and then it was moved to compliance in 2013. I think I remember that this project was put to a postponement in the loan disbursement. Anyway, to cut the story short, the case was closed in 2015. So I'm not going to discuss the merit of the case, but just to show that that kind of engagement with the ADB started with our in-depth engagement with the civil society on the ground. We had a lot of training with groups already, not just the typical IFI watchers, but even academics in Bandung University. So
now, Jelson, so I want to pause you here because I think this photo is really outstanding, and I know that there are a couple of other ones, but I did want to pick up on some of the elements that we see here in this photo because you've mentioned Cambodia a couple of times. You've talked about decentralization and really getting on the ground, and I think this photo in itself is really wonderfully representative of kind of the importance of consultations, right, and the consultations that we see happening that are so important to ensuring that projects are successful and that that communities are consulted so we don't see those complaints kind of further down the line. And on kind of the consultation point, I did want to talk to Reaksmay a little bit just about the Cambodia, because Reaksmay, I know that your organization has been kind of part of this consultation committee with the government of Cambodia. So I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about that and kind of your work there with the CARES program.
Thank you very much, and very pleasure to be here. Thanks to Marina, and thanks to the NGO team, NGOC, for having me. And also pleasure to meet Jelson and Julie. So I'm unlike Jelson. I'm purely an outsider to the ADB. So ActionAid Cambodia, we are focusing on building resilient livelihoods of smallholder farmers and fisher folks. When I say smallholders, we mean the poorest of the poor in the communities area. We're also focusing on climate change adaptations, climate justice, and women's rights. And in the last couple of years, especially during the COVID pandemic, we shift our focus to women and workers in the government and informal economy sectors, whom they were affected the most by the COVID. So actually, ActionAid Cambodia has been actively working in the area of land and tenure security rights as well, with the land victims and land grabs, and also the land grabs are the economic land concessions. So quite a lot of sensitive issues that we are dealing with in Cambodia. If I can go to the international level of it, ActionAid International, we have a report. Thank you. I believe you can see the link I provided. We have a report, Who Cares the Future? So in the report, actually, it focuses more in the African regions, not in Asia. So a lot of our words there is meant for the IMF, not for the ADBs. So in our report, we say, and that marks our international agenda, advocacy agendas. In our report, we say general responsive public services should be delivery on human rights and women's rights angles. And it also should address the strategic finance issues, because when there is only little share, people try to get a bigger share of the pie to their sectors. But in terms of sustainable development, we should think about climate justice and the one who left behind. And the last and emerging agenda is addressing the new debt crisis. So in the developing country, including Cambodia, we try to squeeze our public spending for the debt repayment. So it becomes an extra burden for us. So, and in some countries where they are more than 12% of their share is spent on the debt servicing, that is really a big trouble for the country. So this will become an emerging agenda for CSO to advocate with the government and the international financing institutions and financing sector in Cambodia, including from ActionAid Cambodia as well. So we have the link, and I think
I think we're losing your audio a bit.
There is summary, like one-page summary. You can just skim through it. Oh, sorry. You hear me okay now?
Yeah, it's good now. Sorry, we lost your audio for just a second.
I'm sorry. I'm working from home. So excuse me for that. So back to Cambodia, we do not receive or directly or indirectly from any fund from the ADB. So we are purely external. In the CARES, in the COVID-19 Active Response and Expenditure Support program, so it's a concessional loan to Cambodian government. I think it provides 250 million concessional loan to the government. It is part of the government whole COVID response. I believe that was extended to the end of this year, that program. So actually Cambodia engaged as one of the 15 NGOs and labor unions, one of the 15 members in the subcommittee. So there are 3 committees here, subcommittee, CSO subcommittee, policy subcommittee, and big data subcommittee. So we are engaging in just one of the 3. So in the engagement, we discussed the government priorities, and also we share our common input and observations about especially focusing on the unreached populations by the government. So I think it opens up a great window for us to dig into the government's priorities. So in the discussion, we don't really focusing on just ADB financing activities. We just discuss the whole government programs and priorities. So I think this is good. Beside that, ActionAid and other NGOs, we also engage with the ADB on the development of the country operation business plan back in April. So we kind of a self-organized group. We prepare a bit before we meet with the ADB team, and then we come back and do some feedback after the ADB meeting as well. So I kind of get some of that. Thank you, Marina.
I think your comments dovetail really nicely with Jelson's kind of on the importance of the consultations process to your endpoint during the country operations business plan and also country partnership strategies. Now, I do find it interesting that your organization is implementing a COVID-19 specific project, which is, really kind of it's a disaster project, right? So, and I think there's a lot of unique kind of roles of civil society within the context of disaster projects. And someone who I think can speak to this very well is Julia, because her organization is working in the context of school reconstruction following a cyclone. And before I turn it over to Julia, I did just want to note really quickly, kind of reading through the project manual and project documents, I was really impressed by this project because, the civil society indicators just knock it out of the park. Many of you will know that in the context of our new indicator on civil society engagement, we have kind of 4 areas: information gathering and sharing, consultation, collaboration, and partnership. And in the Cyclone PAM project, they received medium and high ratings on all of these. So really strong engagement with civil society, really strong engagement with Julia's organization. So Julia, turning it over to you to talk a little bit more about Care Vanuatu.
Thank you very much, Marina. Good afternoon from Vanuatu. A little bit on what Care Vanuatu has been doing. I think it would be much similar to what Reaksmay had said. So CARE is working in Vanuatu to support women economic empowerment, women's leadership, and then we had these resilience programs going on with community preparedness, and also we had the humanitarian response. So a lot of our works was building the resilient community and then also responding to what's happening during disasters. So for the ADB, the ADB project in Vanuatu is managed by a managing contractor, which is Kramer and Associates. So they have been contracted by ADB to rehabilitate 4 schools that were being destroyed by Cyclone PAM. And they set out and tender to NGOs requesting NGOs to strengthen the capacity of these same 4 schools to implement disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness activities in these schools that are being reconstructed, and also to because the schools, much of the buildings were being destroyed, including the latrine facilities. So also asking CARE to develop sort of like an awareness or hygiene, and for girls especially the menstrual hygiene management for girls. And because in Vanuatu context, when girls are in their menstrual hygiene, it's another thing, like culturally sensitive. So asking CARE to do sort of like an awareness around MHM. And so the workshop, I mean the request that was put to NGOs was specifically categorized into what should be done pre-construction of these 4 schools, and then what should be done after the completion of these buildings. So it is specifically divided up to what should be done. So for what CARE did was conducting trainings prior rehabilitation to the contractors and the builders around HIV and STI awareness. And then after the completion of these projects, CARE facilitated the disaster risk management workshop to the schools, and also because the schools were surrounded by communities. So not only the schools where we implemented the disaster risk reduction activities, but we also incorporate communities surrounding and in how they could be involved in schools. And in case if there's any other strong cyclone hit, how can they be evacuated into the school buildings? So we had plans, disaster plans, and simulate that. So as you can see in the pictures, there's some simulations on how people can be evacuated and then moved by community disaster and climate change committees, which we set them up, and also have school disaster committees that can support to implement the plans during any disaster response. Yes, so I think that's what we've been doing around this project. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia. You know, I love these photos because it really, I mean, it just hits home to see kind of the work that's being done on the ground by organizations like yours. And also really appreciated kind of your discussion about your partnership with other organizations, you know, kind of on the HIV/AIDS side, in terms of educating people and really working with people on those issues. So I was wondering, you know, kind of given your on the ground experience, you know, working with ADB, what have you found works, and what do you think that we could do better?
Thank you so much, Marina, for the question. So I think, as I mentioned in the previous question, I think that the contractor or the ADB project has clearly given outline, like a clear outlines on each sector's what was required for reporting purposes. So we had like what is expected to be implemented, and what's the workshop outline should look like, what's the training delivery, so this kind of stuff. So we think this was a really good thing that it's clearly outlined what ADB is expecting from NGOs or organizations like CARE. And then also, like you mentioned earlier, the ability of CARE being partners with other organizations is also a strength, because these help us to deliver components in which, if we don't have much understanding around that, but our partners could support in delivering that with, for example, the HIV and STI awareness at the pre-construction phase. And then also another strength that I could draw on from this project that really works well was around aligning the ADB project with our existing programs, because CARE has past resilience program and been responding to a lot of disasters around Vanuatu. So this is a strength where we could draw from that, pulling out resources, and then also having staff's capacity already that we can pull from that to align to implement this project was a really good strength. And yeah, so it supports, and then one good thing about that, because it supports the reconstruction or the rehabilitation construction to look at how can that be maintained if there's any other disasters, what's the plan in place that would be used to manage these buildings in any upcoming disasters, given that Vanuatu is one of the most risky country, because there's several disasters happening in a year round. So that's some of the things that works really well around working with ADB, this ADB project.
Yeah, no, I think you've brought up so many good points. You know, in the clear outlines for requirements, I think that there's a lot of people on this call who can relate to that, and kind of going through the contracting and procurement processes and the necessity of having, kind of very clear requirements outlined. And I think it's a really valuable insight to talk about aligning with your existing programs and really tapping into the strength of your organization and seeing what you are able to really do well. And so I'd be kind of curious to go back to Hong, actually, or sorry, Reaksmay, pardon me, to hear a little bit more from your perspective, which is different because you've worked quite a bit with the government, but also ADB. So whereas Julia is working with partner organizations in ADB, you have a very different kind of interlocutor. So what has your experience been? What works? What doesn't? What do you think?
Thanks, Marina. So as I said, there are 3 subcommittees, one of which is the CSO subcommittee. So we were not engaged in any policy discussions. We kind of engaged in an observatory role in the implementation, the execution of the concessional loans activity. So I think the good thing is the engagement had opened up new windows for CSO. It's extremely new because we cannot dig with any government plan or expenditure or program without the ADB teams or without the invitation to that subcommittee. So the good thing is, again, open up a new window for us to see and to observe or to challenge the whole government COVID response programs. And that also says that we kind of cannot distinguish the difference between the funded activity, the loan, the finance activity by the ADB or by the government or any other development partners. It's a bit hard to distinguish, and because the nature of the engagement is through Zoom, so it's really limited in the discussions. I observed that, and I think other CSO leaders also agree with me that the ADB teams has value inputs from us, has value the good practices from us, because we have information, we have observation from the ground, which the government or the ADB team cannot reach. And they also appreciate some data research from CSO as well. So I thanks and appreciate to the ADB Cambodia conflict team for that. I also observe the government had taken into account our requests or observations to a limited extent. Not really good things, but I think at least the hearers. Perhaps the arrangement, because we are not engaged at the policy discussion. We are engaged at the observatory discussion of the executive plan, the 16th plan. So there are some limitations there. In Cambodia, I think in the Philippines also, we have the NGO forums on ADB also. In Cambodia, I don't think we have it. So the CSO ourselves have limited knowledge about the ADB mechanism and systems as well. So with the short notice invitations, perhaps we did not really well understanding the mechanism of the language and how to influence the discussions as much as we could. I think those kind of information can be more if we understand the system of CSO and ADBs better. There is a sensitivity issues, if I may. So it's a three-party discussions. There is no separate discussion between CSO and ADB. It includes the government, it includes NGOs, it includes labor unions and the ADB teams. So a lot of sensitivity discussion were not there. We generally simplified our words with the government, so that also limited our straightforward discussion with the government as well. Some NGOs they are not to talk straight with the government, but maybe they can talk with the ADB team externally. And then one last thing, I doubt the accountability mechanism has been compromised given the ADB, given the time limited, the COVID pandemic situations. We did not discuss any safeguarding issues in that. And I'm not making any judgment here, but we did not discuss that. So the safeguarding could have been compromised during the interventions. Thank you, Marina.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Reaksmay. So, kind of looking at a couple of your points, I expect that Jelson is going to have a lot of thoughts on them, particularly regarding the accountability mechanism, and also, the points on knowing how to influence kind of the conversation at the multilateral development banks. So, Jelson, I do want to come back to you, but I want to wrap up quickly kind of on the operational front before turning to you for kind of the broader policy themes that we're looking at. So Reaksmay and Julia, kind of tied to what you were just talking about in terms of what we could do better. I mean, what recommendations do you have for kind of enhancing ADB's relationships with civil society on the operational front? Reaksmay, I know you mentioned kind of encouraging an understanding of ADB systems, and perhaps that's one idea, but would love to hear your thoughts, whether there are any kind of, like concrete recommendations you can make to the people on this call.
Sure, thank you. Listening to Julia and Hong, and it appears like what's common among us is we are all international organizations, whether we do implement service delivery because that's part of their humanitarian and development programming mandates, and I know that some of them are also engaged in a number of policy advocacy specific to children's rights and other relevant topics, and this is actually where the ADB operations also could come in. What I actually noticed overall in the ADB in terms of its civil society engagement over the years is that there has been a recognition on their part, not just the NGO center, of course, but all the entire staff, given the instructions, guidance notes, and source book, which basically recognize that, hey, civil society organizations cannot be seen simply as troublemakers. but you can look at them, see them as frenemies, if you can put it that way, or if you like, partners, but not the passive partners. Why am I saying this? I think it's because whether it's humanitarian development advocacy organizations, before they make noise and before they bring the issues to your attention, they've already invested a lot of resources, which includes time, technical support to communities, joint monitoring, also to build trust. And in fact, my experience with ADB projects also is that we were actually doing almost what the ADB staff should be doing before, like why civil society and communities should use the accountability mechanism or access to information or safeguard policies of the bank, because these are the so-called operational policies or tools that they could use to have a voice, to have their voices heard, and to weigh in different aspects of cycles of project implementation. And that could really unfold quite differently across different projects depending on the political economy of where the project is located. But I think one thing that really is important to note here in terms of the ADB operation is that civil society engagement has made progress, and I think it's actually indicated by the development of source book. I noticed that there are some anchors in resident missions where they have formalized, if you can put it that way, a forum wherein there is some kind of like periodic, if not regular, forum with civil society organization. That to me is very important because number one, it's a recognition that country staff have far larger and broader knowledge about the civil society operations and their dynamics and how they can best engage them. Certainly, there will be some troublemakers in the room, but there are also organizations that want to engage with the ADB because they see the value of ADB participation in those projects, not just in terms of the economic benefits, but also access to information. I think that there in countries where there is no strong access to information law, freedom of information, civil society and communities rely on the banks and the ADB to access information where they're supposed to be automatically disclosed information that should be provided by the government appears to be hard to obtain. They turn to the ADB. And I think this is where NGO Center can actually facilitate that linkage between the operation staff and then the NGOs that support the communities. So I think that's one of the areas where the operations of civil society engagement have been making some progress. However, I have to be true to what I have to say, that more can be done, more can be strengthened. And I think that strengthening cannot just be done on an ad hoc basis or in a particular country. I think that there's already some best practices that we capitalize on. So I think this is where I think the stakeholder engagement strategy of the ADB will come in. I am glad that the ADB Safeguard Policy Review update, as it considers to really move towards the performance standards model direction, is really looking at the adoption of the performance standards model. And I think the exciting part of that is, in a way, it's trying to be at par or in line with its peer MFIs, including the World Bank, which has already adopted the ESS 10, the stakeholder engagement. And I think what they're trying to do here is to, in the stakeholder engagement, before I go into the details, I think the important part of having like a performance standards or standards on stakeholder engagement is it kind of like the bank is showing that there is a support infrastructure, so to speak, that provides a formal opportunity for civil society organizations and the communities, including those disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, to have a formal representation or to have their voices heard in the different cycles of the project. And I think specific to that, really, I think this is where not just the NGO Center can come in, but all the operational staff that are members of the task team should really look at the stakeholder engagement as everyone's concern. It's everyone's shared responsibility. But if you have this standards, operational policies, so to speak, of stakeholder engagement, which is part of the overall suite, of standards. It basically it's a support infrastructure, and it provides the necessary the policy statement, also the implementing requirements, and also the guidance note for the ADB staff, NGO center, when to do the right thing, including stakeholder analysis, what to expect in the stakeholder analysis, stakeholder identification, what to expect in terms of information disclosure. I've already mentioned before that, it's through the ADB projects, it's through these standards where hard to obtain information at the country level can actually be accessed through the ADB website and through the bank. And so if you make that as a standard, the stakeholder engagement, it provides greater access to communities in civil society to understand, and they can use this as a tool to become better engaged in the project, including in the consultation. They usually want to come informed before they participate in this consultation. And I think the last thing that's really important here is that the stakeholder engagement is not just stakeholder analysis, information disclosure, or meaningful consultation. One of the most important areas for stakeholder engagement is when you engage civil society and communities at the project level, GRM, grievance redress mechanism, because this is actually where most of the local issues that are raised that are emerging can actually be articulated before they actually go to the accountability mechanism. I'm not saying that GRM is a substitute to accountability mechanism. They can still use that as an option. But before you elevate your concerns to headquarters, I think the stakeholder engagement can be best applied into the implementation of the GRM, because how can you make it independent? How can you make those people that are implementing the GRM to have the ability, the capacity to actually hear, register, and address those emerging grievances? I think this is an area where I recognize accountability mechanism bodies are beginning to see that, before any complaints can actually be elevated. I think some of the ways to best address that is the GRM. No, I'm not saying that's the main area for engagement. That's a very important entry point. So I'll stop there for now, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think, kind of considering your comments, if I was to ask you to choose one area, not to oversimplify in any way, but one area where ADB can improve, it sounds like your position might be kind of on the stakeholder consultation side and ensuring there's transparency and access to information, and that stakeholder engagement is also integrated into our grievance redress mechanisms at the project level. I'd be curious to kind of pose that question to our other panelists. So Julia, Reaksmay, if we were to look at kind of the universe of your experience, and you were to come up with one recommendation that you thought was the most important for ADB to better engage with civil society, what would that recommendation be?
Thank you so much, Marina. So for me, I would say, given the challenges that we faced as an implementing partner on ground, we face multiple challenges on the ground, because given that the context is really unclear when we signed the contract with ADB. So one recommendation that I would put up was the pre-consultation prior to signing the contract. We should set up like a realistic time frame and cost-wise, because sometimes we, like for the case that we had, we already signed the contract and then found out later the situation on the ground. It cost us, because cost us for some expenses that we did. So I think a pre-consultation before signing the contract should be something that would recommend. And also in the contract should have like a space for should provide space for adapting approach if we found what's understood on the ground before we make final amendment to the contract.
Okay. So clarity within the contracting processes, our procurement processes, and ensuring that the organizations that we are working with understand those processes, and there is a built-in flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances on the ground. Okay, and then so Reaksmay, your turn now. What is your one recommendation for ADB?
It's difficult to find only one. So we need to balance between realistic idealism and realistic issues. So I think the sector-based consultations is I think appreciated, has been appreciated. But I think you have this year you celebrate the ADB CSO high table engagement, and Chris just mentioned it's the 20th anniversary of CSO. I doubt such mechanism could be done at the country level. So why not having a comprehensive discussion or dialogue once a year with CSO? And I echo Julia's comments. Pre-consultations is really appreciated, and it's really needed. And the ADB team should not rely on the governments to manage the risk, the consultations, the epic prior, informed consents. You have to do it yourself. We cannot count on the government systems and cultures on managing safeguarding, on managing risk, on ensuring that people are counted. And if I may, Marina, I like this room to be with me like CSO, including NGO, unions, and right activists, and youth group. So when we say NGO, CSO, it's not just NGOs like Chris mentions. So we have the important roles of directly monitoring local implementation of the SDGs. So CSO engagement is not just something you take for granted. It's like Chris mentioned, and I'm glad that you have the corporate CSO engagement framework and the indicators to monitor. So so some CSO is somebody you have to consult with. I mean, given the mandate of the Sustainable Development Agenda. ADB and CSO should be investing on what people identify themselves as important. This should not be necessarily be identified by the government alone. So you mean, so when we prioritize something, it needs to consult, and that's what Julie has mentioned, pre-consultations. And any development funds or loans have to take into account the process of revealing and dismantling the power of donors, government, and the powerful. I think it is an agenda of decolonizations in these years. So you should also addressing the new debt crisis, like I mentioned. So paying the debt services is really a big public burden, a public expenditure burden for the countries. And yeah, I should end here. Thank you.
As an economist, you are speaking to my heart. So I very much agree with you on that, and I know a lot of people who will agree with you on that as well. So thank you so much. I think those are great recommendations, and really kind of pull in some of the themes that we've heard throughout this conversation. I think kind of the overarching recommendation that I keep hearing again, both from you today as well as from civil society colleagues here in Washington, is the importance of consultations and talking to civil society and ensuring that they are informed and that there's kind of this two-way process in terms of communication. We've also covered kind of the importance of decentralization and working close to the ground, and the need for our operational CSOs to have clear, concise kind of contracting processes so that they're able to do the work for these projects. And then finally, a little bit on I know Jelson's going to want to hear this, the grievance redress mechanisms and kind of the accountability mechanism and ensuring that those are really strong. So I think a ton of great dialogue today. I do know that we are exactly on time, actually. So we've got about 15 minutes for questions. So I'd like to open up the floor to the room. So if you, let's do, if anyone has a question that they want to ask in person first, we did receive a couple of kind of pre-questions that we can turn to, but does anyone want to raise a question with our panelists here live? If you, I think you can raise your hand. I might have to ask the team for help on this. Aha. Okay, we do have a hand raised. Subhavan, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, I won't turn on my camera because of the internet system is quite low in the country. I'm from Laos. Yeah, thank you very much for giving us such a very fruitful discussions about NGO civil society engagement in ADB operations. I do agree with Mr. Hong that said that this description or term using that we call CSO in some countries may make misunderstanding for the government counterpart and also the people working in the country, like Laos. We had a lot of discussion in terms of CSO, civil society organizations. In government perspective in this country, civil society organization, they refer to local NGO, non-profit association, not including with the international NGO or NGO. So we every time when we translate the document in the country from English in terms of ADB context, civil society, we also add the translation that including with the locals NGO and international NGOs. And when we write context in any papers in Laos that we target for the government, we also say civil society, including local civil society and NGO. So this is the conflict of term using CON in different countries, particularly in Laos. And the second thing is, I just would like to ask whether your experience working with ADB finance project in whether in Cambodia or sorry, I don't remember the country Julia from. In terms of the contract arrangements with ADB finance projects, sometimes CSO engage with ADB finance project, they perform like a subcontractor, like a private sector. So sometimes when we talk about private sector, they're concerned with the tax payment to the government. While the CSO operations, there is a non-profit association. They do not have tax to pay to the government. So any issue happen in another country like Laos, sometimes it's very difficult for us to justify whether CSO implements some components of ADB finance activity. They have to concern with tax. Otherwise, so in that case, it's very complicated for us to justify and bring NGO on board as an implementer of ADB finance project, rather than now what we can do is just sharing information of ADB operation with the NGO, and also seek consultation when we have country partnership strategy preparations, and also fact-finding of the projects and the project design, that we get a lot of input from both a local and international NGO in the country. Thank you. That's it from me. Over to you, Marina.
All right, thank you so much. Reaksmay, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or anything additional to add. Otherwise,
yes.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Very quickly, so CSO means more than NGOs. It could be youth groups. It could be representative from the indigenous people groups. So I think if we refer to the major stakeholder group, MSG, by the UN definitions, it's include, I think, 14 groups or so. That's include NGO is just one of that. And if you know NGO, I see one of the question on the chat. So how could you define if NGO is allied with the government or business owner or something? This is something you need to know. We cannot tell you. This is something you know. So there are different types of NGO. There are like GONGO, what is it? GONGO, GONGOs, government operated NGOs. There is one big one in Cambodia. It's become as an allied. It's the network of NGOs. They call themselves. But we believe it is a NGO operated NGO, government operated NGOs. We have the goal. I believe it's CO and GO. It's like no DO NGO, donor organized NGOs. So there are different types of NGOs. So you have to judge which one. And in different countries, there are different mechanisms, but I think the simple way to define, perhaps it's similar in Asia and Pacific, is the network of NGOs, something similar or equivalent to umbrella network of NGOs. Like in Cambodia, we have Cambodian corporations, Cambodian operation, Cambodian, was it CCC, I forgot the name, and also NGO forums. So I think the NGOC team in Cambodia has those awareness. So it's really rely on the judgment and consultation. You will distinguish different type of NGOs. Thank you, Marina.
If oh yes, most welcome. No, thank you. Yeah, if I could jump in here too, just to kind of make a plug for the NGOC's knowledge products. I do think that this is kind of a question that we get at a bit in the source book. I think we have Lainey on here in case she wants to comment more on it. But the source book does address kind of the nature of different civil society organizations and offers some insights into how to distinguish, you know, whether it's an organization that's associated with the government or versus, you know, kind of what we would consider more within the civil society realm. So please do keep an eye out for the source book. And Chris has also just put in the chat box the definition of CSOs within our new operations manual. So I do want to turn back to the audience and see if anyone else has a question. You can raise your hand. Okay, so I do think we have time just to do kind of one more. And so I would be very curious about this one. So I forget who this is from. So please take credit, whoever it is, but did the pandemic hinder ADB engagements with your organizations, and how have you adjusted to the current situation? Julie, I'd be interested to hear that from you, given that Vanuatu, I don't even know if there were COVID cases in Vanuatu, but interested to hear that, but then also interested to hear kind of in the Cambodia case as well.
Thank you, Marina. So for Vanuatu, just a background on COVID. At the moment, we have nil COVID cases in the country, but government is trying really best to add prevention measures in place because we had COVID cases rises in nearby countries, our neighboring countries. So for our projects, we try to adapt them to also respond to COVID-19. We have other grants that support COVID-19, like adapting our projects to actually do awareness rollout on prevention measures and also for people to get vaccinated. So that's what's been ongoing. We try to adapt this grant to fit into all the projects that is existing to make sure to also raise awareness as part of the ongoing implementation of activities, and also, like I've said, awareness on the safe practice measures and also awareness on getting vaccinated, because there's been a lot of conspiracy around COVID vaccine going on in media, social media. So a clear awareness, explaining at the low context, because since we're working with the remote communities and getting them to really understand that this is a prevention measures, and while we're still COVID-free, we need to be vaccinated so we can prevent our people from getting infection. Yeah, so I think that's what we're doing around COVID measures.
Okay, that's great. And how about in the Cambodia case? I mean, your project was all about COVID.
Yes, it's all about difficulties in accessing to the peoples. We were like restricted in terms of travels. So people in our area, and the affected people cannot be reached remotely or virtually. They have to be there. And then because of the the travel restrictions, we could not travel there. And that things come back to my wonder, the question about safeguarding. How could you ensure that there is no corruption, there is no anything when we deliver the aids to the affected people? the government has issued a kind of multi-million cash grant schemes for the affected population. How do you ensure that you selected the right people? How do you ensure that the people who are mobile, like moving, so they don't have any registered document in that location where they are live, where they are locked up, so they cannot register to the government scheme. So how can you ensure that they are not excluded?
Right.
So this is a big question, and I think everyone challenges, including the ADB team and also the government themselves.
Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you so much for those. And so we are almost out of time, but Jelson, we did not have a chance to get to all of the photos that you had to share with us today. So I was wondering if we could perhaps turn back to those, and if you could tell us a little bit more about some of them, because I'm sure that everyone would really love to hear the stories directly from the ground. So the tech team, can we put those back up? Okay. All right. Jelson, walk us through these.
Okay, what I'll do is quickly walk you through and give you a brief description of what these photos are. But again, I want to connect that with our discussion about civil society engagement. So next slide, please. The next slide, next slide, please. The next slide basically is about the Tata Mundra Ultra Mega Power Plant. It's, as probably some of you know, are engaged on the private sector operations. It's one of the biggest loans that not just the ADB, but the IFC, the MIGA, Exim Bank, and commercial lenders have provided, because it's one of the first ultra mega power plants in India. But I'm not going to discuss about the technicalities of that. But the point there is that I was quite engaged there since 2008 with my team in India, and what you see there is basically the communities, especially the fish workers, the fishermen, who are affected by the construction of that coal power project, and that there was a lot of issues there. Those issues were put together when we organize a fact-finding mission. As a panel of experts there, we get people from former Supreme Court Justice from India, National Commission Human Rights member, basically high-level people that we just wanted to make sure that before these kinds of complaints were brought to accountability mechanism of the IFC and the ATB, some of those issues from community has been validated and reinforced by this panel of experts. If you go back further on the first slide, what you see there, the earlier slide, what you see there is we had a meeting with the Tata Mundra power company. Yeah, what you see there is like we had made effort to make sure that we brought to them the issues, and they responded to have a meeting. But when it comes to following up on their commitments, that's the struggle. And that is why on the next slide, what you will see there are, a copy of the complaint that they raised to accountability mechanism, including the OCRP. I'm not going to discuss the merits of the case.
That would take an entire legal case to discuss.
Yeah, exactly. But the next slide, but the next slide. So, but basically, there's so many forms of engagement that we have with the bank, from the staff to bank executive directors, all the way to accountability mechanism bodies. I could still remember when I had to do a lot of troubling, nagging Chris to help me set up a meeting with the concerned staff there. And what you see on the top right there, basically, that was when the case had been brought to the CRP, and they found that there's a number of policy non-compliance issues. And then the communities were not happy with the remedial action plan. And so dissatisfied, they look for other avenue, and they brought their case to the Supreme Court. I think it's in 2014. It took them until 2019 to get the US Supreme Court to say no. The IFC is not totally does not have the absolute immunity. So that's why we're going to hear this case, and that's basically a pivotal a groundbreaking kind of case because where complaints were often brought to the accountability mechanisms of the bank, and if there was deep dissatisfaction on the management response, then communities will always look for NGOs like us to look for other avenues. And what you see there basically are some of the top-notch lawyers from Earthrise International, American University. We got some of the best litigators, really. No, so I think this is where the engagement with the bank can take, and it goes beyond engagement with the bank. And when the case was a success on the part of communities, we brought that good news to them. It's a cause for celebration, but of course the issue there does not stop. And so I'll stop the story there. If you move next to the next slides, please. Without going into the details, if you go to the next slide, please. I think it got stuck. What you see there are, those are projects that ADB has been supporting since the IFI re-engagement in 2011. The first one that you see there is the Mingjan Power Project, co-financed with AIIB and IFC and MIGA. So that kind of engagement basically started first with the community. We went where the project was. We had to translate some of our knowledge products into local languages so that women can actually have a more informed and structured way to provide their comments. And then the data that we gather, we put that into a paper. It's called Voices from the Ground. And then we also use that as a basis to have a meeting with the project developer. And I remember at the time we had people from the ADB, AIIB staff, and IFC, joining that conversation. What is actually good in the good picture is the last slide. If you go to the last slide, please. Last slide. Okay. So all these kinds of monitoring, all those kinds of monitoring, engagement, training, all those fact-finding missions, sometimes one of the best way to get the attention of the bank is to bring it to the highest leadership. The photo on your left is the Civil Society Forum with the then Asian president in 2018. I see Chris there moderating it. But basically, that was our way to get the attention of the bank and the president to say, hey, we have a problem with this project. At the time when Myanmar is still undergoing a fragile transition. And then on the upper right, you will see some of the people there having a meeting with the OCRP and OSPF. And then all these kinds of meetings led to the lower right photo. That was when we had a meeting with the ADB the Director General for Private Sector. We got the Counter Director from the Myanmar. I see the Safeguard Specialist in charge of the resettlement, the Project Officer. I still see Nasim Ahmad, who is now with the IFC, being part of that conversation. I guess what I'm trying to say there is that when we do good research, when we know exactly what the issues are, what the talking points are, and we are clear that we are not just here facilitating a meeting, the intention is not just to tell them about the problems that have been identified, but also discuss the problem resolutions. And it became the basis for follow-up. And I think that's what I call a constructive, engagement, where sometimes you disagree, but you can agree, disagree. We can be respectful, but at the same time, we always have to look for specific resolutions for follow-up. And I guess what it means to the civil society engagement with the ADB is that, number one, I think the discussion about having a performance standards on stakeholder engagement is a great opportunity to actually put together some of the best practices when it comes to dealing with issues about stakeholder engagement, because this may be quite a challenging environment to do a civil society engagement. The reality is there will continue to be some challenging environment where civil society practices might happen. For example, I know that it's quite difficult to do a civil society engagement in Myanmar now, given the current situation there. I understand also that Myanmar is one of the so-called fragile and conflict-affected, situation countries. How do you do stakeholder engagement? So I think it's a challenge. It's something that we have to learn on, but I think having a so-called standards, a mandatory standards for stakeholder engagement will be an important role to do that.
So I was going to end on this note, but then Reaksmay, you put your hand up. So any final parting thoughts from you? Uh-oh, we can't hear you. Oh no.
So a few questions we haven't addressed. With your permissions, do I have your...
Sorry,
my
the
internet.
audio.
Oh.
The audio went bad for a minute, right when you started speaking.
Yeah, let me turn off the video for now. So I just saw some questions in the chat, the pre-questions. I don't know if we have some time to go through that, Marina.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but we've actually run out of time today. I don't know, maybe we can come up with kind of a plan for engagement so that maybe people can have a dialogue with you, or something like that. I don't know, Chris, Roselle, maybe we can kind of huddle and figure something out. Because I feel bad interrupting this conversation. But we are out of time today. I'm so sorry. And I do think, Jelson, it was a really appropriate note to end on, kind of talking about some of the higher level policy issues. But for me, kind of, your second to last slide, Voices from the Field, really symbolizes civil society engagement to me, and kind of the on the ground nature of the work that we do, and the importance of really kind of those grassroots methods. So we will follow up. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. It has been such a pleasure to hear about your experiences and to have the opportunity to have this dialogue. And I know there's still questions in the chat, and we will figure it out, how to put people in touch for further conversations. So Roselle, I think I'm handing it over to you, and with thanks to everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marina and our panelists, Jelson, Reaksmay, and Julia, for a very insightful discussion, and to our colleagues who posted their questions. Thank you very much. What we'll do is, please we'll forward, if it's all right with you, we'll forward the questions that we have to our panelists, and we hope you could respond to them, and we'll again circulate those responses to our participants today, and then we'll perhaps find a way to have a follow-up activity after this session. Thank you very much. I think it's I'm requesting our friends from Tofu Creatives to capture the key points of our discussion in graphics form. So let me call in Desiree D of Tofu Creatives to present the highlights of our discussion. Des, over to you.
Thank you, Roselle. We started with Chris giving us an update on the releases of operations manual, staff instruction, and the CSO source book. And as for our panelists, some key points, how this started as a watchdog role, the importance of community consultations, using accountability mechanisms for access to information and policies, and how this is a shared responsibility for all of us. And for our second speaker, he discussed about discussing it with government priorities, also addressing the new debt crisis. But we cannot also solely rely on government, and it's important to involve CSOs in discussions. And CSOs are not just NGOs, and it's a much wider net. And then Julia talked about the project on DRR trainings with communities, and also the importance of alignment with existing programs, tapping the strengths of the organizations and the ability of projects to be able to adapt and respond to the changing needs. Okay, thank you everyone for letting us draw the big picture with all of you. We're looking forward to the next 2 days as well. Back to you, Rosel.
Great. Thank you, Des. I thought that seeing the highlights of our discussions today in graphics form is a fitting way to close our session day at the first day of our 3-day training at a high point. Thank you very much again to our CSO panelists for your substantive feedback to ADB on how we can promote further our engagement with civil society organizations. Before you leave, please may we request you to send your feedback about this session by clicking the evaluation form in the chat box. Is it in our chat box, or or how to use that that code on screen? It will lead you to the evaluation form. It's important to hear from you on how we can improve sessions like this. Also, just a reminder to our CSO anchors who are joining tomorrow for day 2 of this training. We'll start at the same time tomorrow, 12 noon Manila, and you can use the same Zoom meeting link that you used today. We'll have 2 sessions tomorrow. The first is we'll discuss the key sections of the forthcoming source book, or the Handbook for Engaging CSOs in ADB Operations, which aims to be a guide for us, for our staff, on how to promote CSO engagement in our work. The second is sharing of insights from our colleagues from South Asia Regional Department, because they investigated the trends in CSO engagement in ADB-supported projects from 2015 to 2020, and they will share key insights on the results of this study. Going back to our session on the source book, in that session tomorrow, we'll break into small group discussions on the following topics. Actually, we have raised these topics today, and we'll have a deeper dive into discussing engaging CSOs during country programming, effective consultations with CSOs, identifying, scoping, and assessing CSO capacity, and innovative procurement. So we'll talk about those topics. And for those of you who have confirmed for tomorrow's session, we'll divide you into groups. We'll assign groups where you can join, and we'll also send ahead discussion points, in particular sections of the source book discussing these 4 topics, so you can prepare ahead for our discussion. All right. With that, thank you very much. We've extended for 2 minutes, but we hope that you've gained insights from today's discussion. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you very much, Rosel. Take care. Goodbye.
Take care, everyone.